We've got Tyler Jorgenson here. He is the founder of Burn Media and the host of Biz Ninja Radio podcast, which is as seen on ABC Radio, which is fantastic. We're going to talk about that too, how he's got his podcast on ABC Radio, how he builds so many brands, how he helps people with podcasts, what it's been like to interview hundreds of people. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Tyler.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, let's start off with what you just shared, because you just shared that you launched 176 brands in a 9-month period from complete ideation to launch. What was that like? What's the backstory?
Sure.
I'm definitely very curious.
Yeah, I've always really loved the beginning stages of business. I love the ideation, the getting ready, and the launch. And so I had a friend that had a contract with a big investment group, and they needed to build a bunch of new stores. So they were like, we need 100 Shopify stores in the next 3 months. And so they're like, we need them. Let's get going. So I was building one a day, essentially from ideation to brand to build out to like initial product sourcing, and then launching it that day. And then the next day starting over and doing that. Did it for 100 days in a row, essentially. And then they ended up ordering 76 more. And so it was a fun project. It was a little bit too aggressive of a long sprint. I mean, it's like turning a sprint into a marathon. So it was exhausting, but it was fun because I love the early stage of business and the ideation and launch.
Wow. What did you learn that you weren't expecting by launching so many brands and businesses so quickly?
I think the unexpected takeaway was how business is really formulaic, right? And I think sometimes the entrepreneur in me thinks that it's magic and there's this graceful art to it all. But really it's like, okay, identify niche, identify name, find first few products, right? And so it was so much more formulaic and systematized when you had to do it that fast.
Yeah. And speaking of the formula, and I'm excited because we're going to dive into all kinds of different things because you're a man of many talents with your podcast and radio show and all the things that you're doing, helping people build those. But I am curious to stay on this topic. What is your process for launching? Let's say it's a brand, whether it's Shopify or something else. Like, what is that formula and process that you've uncovered after doing so many of these?
Yeah, I think at the very beginning, it's first identify, is there actually a market? And so so many people have this, they say they have these brilliant ideas, and then you check in with them 2 or 3 years later and they're still talking about their idea. They've never gone and tested the idea. And so I'm a big believer of you identify the market you want to serve and then you ask them what they want and you sell them that. So being really market first is the major shift that has become so much easier now in the digital era than when you used to have to come up with a new product and go through prototyping and doing all these things. And then maybe you could find a buyer. You can test out buyers and test out markets in minutes. And it's just so much cooler.
And when it comes to those tests and the different things that you see, what's kind of your favorite way to validate a new brand when you're testing it?
Yeah, the best way for me has been the same for the past about 15 years. And that's people, there's a big difference between will people, like if you ask your friends and family, hey, would you buy this? A lot of them are going to say yes, because one, there's a bias where they just want to make you happy. But there's a really big difference when you ask the market to buy. And so we have done for a long time, if we're testing out a new product, I'll either just build a product page, like a 2-step order form, and actually run ads to that 2-step order form. And if people start checking out, now I know there was actually purchase intent. And so then the options behind that are either one, take the sale and do a drop ship and send the product from somebody else. Or two, a lot of times on that 2-step order form, after they submit the first step, it goes, hey, sorry, we're actually out of stock right now, but we'll email you once we get back in stock. And a lot of times I'll build an email list of people that, you can make your first revenue be just from that testing and that first email list once you actually have the product.
That's great. I think so many people don't think about doing something like that and to actually go out and get validation, to test it, to see who's actually willing to buy and invest before you spend all the time, building everything out, but actually putting a little bit of money behind it and putting effort behind launching it. So it's a good, the MVP model. So I love that. And so anything else kind of on that topic that you think would be, kind of valuable insights that you've gained before we kind of transition a little bit? Because I definitely want to dive into some of the other things that you're doing.
Absolutely. I think the biggest takeaway is don't get stuck in ideation. Move from ideation to testing as fast as possible, right? So if you are testing a new marketing angle or you're testing a new product completely, it's so easy to get emotionally connected to that and then almost not want to put it out to the market because what if they say no? But the sooner you can get to like moving from ideation to testing, the faster you can grow.
That makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. And so when it comes to, where some of the things that you're doing right now, which is, of course, you got the Biz Ninja podcast and radio show, which is great. And one of the things I'm curious about is, what that looks like. And then I do want to go back and talk about kind of the journey to get there. But do you mind just sharing with the viewers, the audience, like a little bit more about the podcast, about the radio show?
Sure.
For maybe people who are discovering it for the first time.
Absolutely. So I started Biz Ninja Entrepreneur Radio years ago, right after the 2008 market had wiped me out. And I actually started it because I just wanted to grow my personal network. I wanted to be able to talk to these entrepreneurs that I probably wouldn't have been able to get on the phone. But by having a show, I was willing to get, they were willing to come and talk to me. In fact, some of my like entrepreneur idols actually were reaching out to me to be on the show. And so I was able to have people like Tim Ferriss and Neil Patel and people like that on the show where I don't think I would have had those conversations otherwise. So for me, it was how do I get in front of people that were hard to get in front of? And so for you as the guest or as the listener, you get to be a part of those conversations. You get to hear what they're sharing, their success stories, their wounds, their the lessons learned, kind of like what we're talking about here. And so I've been doing that for 15 years, just sharing the entrepreneurial journey and really uncovering how to overcome obstacles and setbacks and how to build momentum.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that also it kind of came out of, maybe you going through some challenges and then saying, how can I grow my network? How can I build this? And then really turning it into something big. And that's one thing that I've, discovered. I was saying right as we started here, you're on over 500 episodes and, this is episode 20 something. That being said, it's one of those things that everything that you're sharing is exactly true. I love like having these conversations and just connecting on a deeper level with people, seeing the strategies, what makes them tick, what their story is. So I love that. And speaking of that, I'd love to hear a little bit more. And I already know some of this, but to dive a little bit deeper for the listeners and also for myself as well, a little bit more about your journey and your overall story. I know you kind of shared some challenges that happened.
Sure.
In 2008, and that kind of led to the podcast. But do you mind just kind of going back, like to the beginning of your entrepreneurial journey and going from there?
My entrepreneurial journey started when I was 5 years old. So I didn't realize that what it was at the time, but I wanted candy, and everyone else in my neighborhood, even at 5 years old, their parents would give them money to go to the store and get candy, and my parents didn't. It was like, hey, you can eat something at home, and so I wanted to get some money. And so I actually started picking flowers from the neighborhood and then selling them door to door. And the first door I knocked on, I picked flowers from this lady's front yard and went and tried to sell her a bouquet of flowers. And her name was Grandma Leela, and she ended up buying from me for like 10 years. And it turned out after the first one or two, she was like, stop picking my flowers, just come and say hi to me and I'll so it was great. But I think what I learned is entrepreneurs solve problems. And so I just always saw the lack of something or when something was missing as an opportunity for me to be the one that fixes it. I didn't think that was unique. That was just how I saw the world. And so from paper routes and lemonade stands and finding weird things to like flip and sell during high school to kids. And I was always finding just a way to solve the problem, which was I needed some money. And so into college, I started a snowboard company where I would sell snowboards and skis to college students. And this was when they were really expensive still. So we would buy last year's models and sell them to college kids at a discount. So they get really high-end brand new stuff at really cheap prices. And it was a cool little market where I was able to make $100 a sale. They were able to have a great deal. And I didn't have to have a job during my first year of college. And it's pretty much been like that forever, where I've owned restaurants, I've owned gyms, I've owned supplement brands and beauty and cosmetic companies. I've owned sunglass companies, all kinds of things, just because I see an idea or I saw a need and I was like, I can solve that. Why wait for someone else?
That's awesome. I love it. I love always hearing about the different entrepreneurial journeys. It's kind of interesting because I was recently on your podcast and you've got it down to the science. We're going to talk a little bit about that because I want to know even for myself, but for all the listeners, how you've kind of perfected this over the years. But when I was on there, I was sharing my story, and a remark that you made is it's so similar to like there's a lot of entrepreneurs that start young and and dive in, and now you're sharing the same kind of thing. So we're all wired that way. So I'm sure
Yeah.
everybody who's listening is nodding their head. One thing that I'm curious about with all of these different brands, right? And this is something I'm curious, like what you found has worked, and also maybe what some challenges are, because it sounds like I would assume you're kind of higher on the quick start side, right? Like, creating a lot of different projects, things like that. But where do you see, and how do you determine which projects to continue and to really focus on and go deeper on versus which ones, you kind of test and then, maybe flip or, kind of pass on to the next person? How do you kind of determine what to actually go deep on?
Yeah, when I was doing a lot more physical products, I had a really simple formula that was margin plus market. So, is there enough margin that I can make mistakes? Because to me, that's so important. I am not a perfectionist. I'm not someone who's going to sit and like really just not, I'm going to make mistakes. And I need margin in the product to be able to allow for that and to be able to give me permission to just move quickly. And then the market was, okay, I have margin, but is anyone buying? And, this is a marketing podcast. I have become a marketer, but I was not inherently a marketer. I was more like, I used to believe in the old adage of if you build a better mousetrap, the whole world will beat down a door to buy it. And I don't anymore, because most of the time people don't know about that mousetrap and they don't really care. As long as there's a mousetrap, as long as the problem's being solved, they're actually buying into things like convenience and simplicity and speed, not better, right? And so I had to learn the rest of marketing. I was really good at just coming up with ideas and getting started. And I think I've really worked on becoming more of a holistic marketer who happens to be an entrepreneur over the past decade.
That's great. And what would you say are some of the biggest marketing lessons that you've learned or strategies that you would like to employ overall? I know you shared one earlier about the MVP and testing, but what are some of those different strategies that you like to use or lessons that you've learned?
I think some of the biggest takeaways, because I've done so many, I've built so many funnels for clients and for my own stuff. And I've built, Shopify pages and run so many ads and done all of these different things. And when you see so many businesses, you start to see some patterns. And I think the biggest ones I see is that bad ads to a good product and to a good offer can still work. But if your offer and your product aren't good, it doesn't matter how good your ads are, it's going to break. And so really great products and offers precede a successful ad campaign.
Completely agree with that 100%. And so what have you found with at least the types of brands you've worked with make the difference between a great offer that's going to convert versus maybe one that doesn't work as well?
I think that's interesting because there's a lot of different ways to answer that. But I think the
Yeah.
most consistent one is that there's an emotional component, because especially in direct response, right, where you're running ads, you're interrupting somebody doing something in their day. And so it has to stop them and change what they were doing to a point where they're willing to potentially have to go get their credit card out. It's a little easier now. I feel like everyone's just digitally connected now, but it was only a couple of years ago where, you had to make sure this is going to be a compelling enough thing that they're going to get up off the couch, go into the room, get their credit card, come back, potentially enter that credit card in front of someone and have to emotionally or justify what they're doing. And so the amount of emotion you have to evoke and create to get that level of change, I think that's really the biggest thing that became more consistent. And it doesn't mean the emotion's always the same, right? Sometimes the emotion can be different, but it has to exist.
That makes sense. And when it comes to the podcast side, you shared kind of the origin story of launching the podcast. What I'm very curious about is, what was the story of how the podcast grew? How did you get onto, ABC radio? We'll talk a little bit more about some of the questions, some of the cool guests that you had
Sure.
on and some of the tips, but just in terms of the journey of the podcast, so 15 years of doing your podcast, what's kind of the breakdown of what that journey's been like?
So I had no plans to do a radio show. I was contacting radio shows to buy long form remnant ads, right? It was something I learned in the 4-hour work week, that radio shows and cable companies and things like that, sometimes at the end of the month, they have leftover ads that haven't been sold, and you can buy those spots at a discount. So I was talking to a station about running ads for a product of mine. And I ended up talking to the owner, and I was telling him what I was doing. And he just being an entrepreneur too, started asking follow-up questions. He's like, what do you mean that's what you do? What do you mean you're selling this? How did you get the idea to call me? And he's like, I want you to come into the station to talk about this. So I went over there, and he threw me on air within 5 minutes. He put me on somebody else's show. He's like, hey, just talk to this guy. I want him on the radio. And from that being on air, like, it was this weird, like, overwhelming moment, because you're live, right? It's so different than a pre-recorded thing when there's no editing. It's out there, whatever you say. And it's got this really cool energy. But it put me into this weird, like, state. And within 2 weeks, I had my own show. I was live for an hour a week. And I didn't know what the format was going to be. I didn't know how we were going to do it. I didn't know how I was going to fill the time. And it just evolved into a show where I would do, in that hour, it was about 10 minutes of sharing some news and some success stories and case studies. And then I'd go to commercial, and I'd interviews, and then I'd have somebody call in, and I'd interview them for 15 minutes, commercial, another 15-minute interview, commercial, and then a wrap up. And when the producer from that station went from NBC News, over to an ABC News station, asked me if I wanted to come over as well. So I was like, yeah, okay, I don't really care, like, as long as it's still working. So we moved over, and we take little breaks here and there, but we've been on air interviewing entrepreneurs now for 15 years.
Wow, that's incredible. And I'm curious because, with the radio and stuff like that, it's like it's a different, whole different medium. We'll talk about the podcast side of it in a second. But when it comes to radio, how does that, like, I know it's a very broad question, but how does it all work in terms of the metrics that you see? Do you have, like, a sense of, like, listenership, like,
Yeah.
And again, like, I'm curious, like, is it still going really strong? Like, or, have you seen
Sure.
shifts over the years? I'm curious, like, what you're currently seeing.
Yeah, spoken like somebody who really understands ads and analytics. So I think the first part of your question is, on terrestrial radio, you don't see the same kind of data tracking, right? You see Nielsen ratings and things like that.
Yeah.
So in the media kit for the radio station, they show, here's your listenership, and it means potential people that we're throwing it out into the air to. They might listen to it. We don't know, right? And so we don't have data and tracking. But when I started the show, podcasts were still super new. I mean, back then, there was maybe 2 podcasters that people knew about, right? And it was still looked at as kind of a hokey thing, not being as credible. But within a couple of years, we started putting every episode on podcast as well. So the first handful weren't. The first handful were just radio only. And then it was kind of like, well, this is silly. We're doing the work, might as well get more distribution. And it probably wasn't until about 5 years in that we started taking that more seriously. And it's like, hey, let's also put them on YouTube. Let's create social content. And even the social side, that really only happened in the last couple of years. So the evolution from being radio to being omnichannel has really just been in the last couple of years. And terrestrial radio continues, just like TV and things like that, continues to decline. More and more people listening to podcasts in their car and things like that. But there are still a lot of people that listen to terrestrial radio, especially in shopping places or in their cars, things like that. But for the most part, yeah, it's in decline. But the credibility of ABC News is still cool.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And the credibility. And I remember you're like, all right, now you can say you're as seen on ABC News, So it's really cool and interesting. It's like the combination. It's like what you see with YouTube versus TV, right? There's so many people flocking to YouTube, watching YouTube, advertising on YouTube. If you're on a television station, there's still that credibility of being interviewed on, TV news, and
Yep.
And so, and it makes so much sense because it's like, as if you see some of the listenership might be declining, the podcasts are just, I would even venture to bet that, like, overall the market share of people listening to this type of thing is probably growing. I'm curious your perspective on that, but podcasts have gotten so popular these days.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Have you seen that?
Absolutely. And again, some people will, the negative side is, well,
Mhm.
there's so many podcasts. Why should I start one? No one's going to listen to it. I'm like, well, you don't have no idea if you started a radio show, if anyone's going to listen. You have no idea if you started a
Yeah.
TV show, if anyone's going to watch and so I think the challenge is people measure success with metrics that they don't understand. Right. So it's like, oh, why is success? Why does success mean 1 million subscribers? Where like, what is the strategy, right? So for us, with what we do with Burn Media, we focus a lot more on quantity or on quality than quantity, right? We're saying, hey, it's not about having. I use this simple example. It's not about having 1,200 listeners that aren't ideal customers. It's about having 12 listeners that are perfect clients, right? And so using your podcast and your show to pre-educate and connect and build rapport with potential clients and potential people that you want to impact and influence. That's the angle for us.
I love that. And I'm going to dive deeper into some of your strategies for people, launching a podcast, and also some of the ways that, you're helping people as well with all of that. We're going to dive into that in just a second. Before we get into that, I'm curious, because you've interviewed over 500 people. What are some of the common threads that you've seen with the entrepreneurs that you've interviewed? What have you kind of noticed and picked up that maybe other people haven't recognized?
I think that the kids today say that they're all delulu. So there is a common thread that entrepreneurs are a little bit delusional. And it's that they believe that they can do it, even if other people running an analysis of the situation would think they're crazy or that it's going to take a lot of work. I think consistently they don't worry about the amount of work. They just focus on that this can be done. And so it's from everything from large physical product companies or software companies or investment firms, like all the different people. They weren't as worried about the work or the challenges as much as they believed they could do it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and you need that level of just whether it's a little bit of delusion towards or extreme optimism or whatever it happens to be, to definitely go out and just take action and focus on a big goal. And so I love that. And when it comes to some of the people that you've interviewed that are really like, at the top of their game, some of the people you mentioned, Tim Ferriss, Neil Patel, some of the high, bigger names that you've had on your podcast, what have you noticed with them, like the way that they show up, the things that they're thinking about? And of course, people can go, and I encourage them and to go and listen to those episodes for themselves. But I'm curious what you've picked up on in terms of commonalities among some of those people as well.
One of the guests is a friend of mine, Alex Hermosi, and he has become a pretty good thought leader in the entrepreneur space over the past few years. And he summarized it really well. And he said that there's a strong correlation between entrepreneurs that are successful and high levels of trust. So they trust people. And this is an interesting caveat to that. Like when we say we trust people, the question is, are you trusting the person or are you trusting your judgment of them? Right. And so if you're trusting them, that means you're just trusting them. You're not saying, I think they're a good person, right? You're saying, I'm trusting them. But there is this cliff of trust where if you trust without any guidelines or boundaries or scruples. And so for me, I've made a lot of mistakes through the years of extending trust too far. Right. And that's held me back because once someone starts, you can trust and you can move quickly in business on a handshake. But once someone starts showing you their true colors, you need to recognize that and then make adjustments. And so I learned that from Alex, and I see that in the people who are more successful, that they move fast, they trust, they have high levels of allowing people to have autonomy. But when someone shows you that they're not going to be a fit for your team or for your life, trust them.
That's really good feedback. And I think something a lot of people need to hear. I know that rings true to me as well. Like one of the, the most challenging things that I, needed to learn was that not everybody who got you there is going to get you to the next level. And if people show you their true colors, believe them or trust them, in that. So that makes a lot of sense. So that's definitely an interesting one to think about. When it comes to how you prepare for these podcasts, across the board, the way that you show up, how you present yourself, I can tell, seeing it from the other side. It's actually really interesting. I'm glad that we're doing this podcast after, I went on yours, because what I saw there is something that I want to ask you about. It's just this level of professionalism. Of course, that comes with time, doing it over a longer period of time. But, what is that kind of methodology that you have? Is there a process that you go through? Like, what does that look like?
So I intentionally maintain a low production and low pre-research show. And there are people who go really, really deep. They're focusing on, like, I'm going to uncover something from 20 years ago and I'm going to bring that up and we're going to try to get you to be emotional. And that's fine. There's great shows that do that. My show, because it is still formatted as if it was live on air, it's 28 minutes and we cap it right there. There's not time to have that level of depth. And so I kind of look at my show as a really good introduction to the person, so that if people want to go get to know more about them, they can go to their site and their show and things like that. And so my preparedness is relatively limited. I do initial research and just see what companies have they been on LinkedIn, what have they been a part of, what digital footprint, do we have any personal connections from before? Like I was able to see, when you first showed up in my email inbox, right?
Yeah.
So I look for stuff like that because I like the personal connection side, but then I allow the show to kind of take a natural flow. And I have 3 questions I ask almost every episode. And then I have about 12 general ones that I use. But I really like to have a conversation based on where those first couple things go. So I have building blocks that I follow, but they're adjustable per episode. And so I think it is a little bit of experience and just having done it a lot of times, but it's also the nature of the show that we like to be not overly produced.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. I think it probably is what I was picking up on and feeling is just the fact that you've done this so much. And then it was very effortless the way that it flowed. And then I think you ask really good follow-up questions, or you actually really let the conversation flow. So I think it sounds like you need to either pick a direction, really doubling down on that, or be very well researched in advance. I think maybe some people die a little bit in the middle. Would you say that's accurate, or I'm curious your perspective on that?
Yeah, my personal take on where I think podcasters miss is where they do a lot of pre-research and they have a list of questions. So they want to ask all of those questions, which actually puts them in a box and makes it to where the conversation now can't flow smooth. And so if I say something and you're already thinking about the next question you're going to ask, but you're like, wow, I actually wanted to ask a follow-up question. My encouragement to podcasters is give yourself permission to ask follow-up questions, to have a conversation using your research and using the questions that you created as a guide, but be a little bit more flexible in it. Unless your show is not a conversation, it's just a question and answer.
Yeah. No, I love that. And that also that's very encouraging to me, because that's kind of how I've been doing it. But I was kind of wondering, okay, how deep do you go? And I was recently on a podcast. I don't know if you know Michael Stelzner as well, at social media marketing podcast. And he's got like a very robust like beforehand call. And we basically have a full hour to like prep the entire thing. And it's very interesting to see how he does it, how you do it, like the different ways that some of the people like, in that category that have been doing this for a long time, the ways that people kind of set it up.
Yeah.
So I personally love your style, and the way that you do it is resonates with me for sure.
Yeah.
All right. And at the end, by the way, this is a little taste for the people who are listening or watching. I'm going to ask you, Tyler, to give me your raw, unfiltered feedback of this podcast. So that's a little something we can look forward to. I want to hear it. You can tell me like it is. Maybe sandwich it a little bit. A little
of course, I got you.
You could go in, but anyways, we'll get there in a second. But kind of diving into what you would share and recommend for other people. So there might be somebody watching this podcast or listening to this podcast that wants to start a podcast or maybe a radio show as well. What's your advice for them? I know, of course, this is something that you really help a lot of people with. So we'll talk about, how people can get your help shortly as well. But what is that kind of, process that you have when you think about launching a show?
Yeah, the first thing is why. Why do you want to do a show? Is it because you just feel you have a message that you need to get out? If that's the case, go cheap. Just do it. just start recording and start publishing. If it's about learning and to like hear your voice and finding your voice and being able to just get that thing that's sitting in you out to the world, just go. Don't wait any longer. Don't wait to make it perfect. Just start publishing. And there's simple apps to do that, right? You can basically go to anchor.fm and have it live by the end of the hour. If it's about strategy, however, my recommendation is to be strategic. And so the people that we work with, it's not that they just have something in them that needs to get out. That might be part of it, but they also want to launch the next stage of their business. Maybe that's their personal brand. Maybe they've been an expert in their industry and they want to become a consultant and a speaker or whatever that next side is. If it's strategy, then I recommend leaning into people that are strategic and can be good strategic partners. And that's what we do with Burn Media is we make it to where all those people have to do is show up and record and then go back to being the expert and running their business, and everything else just happens for them.
Oh, that's great. So you're basically setting up the whole process, all the different pieces on that side. Like, so yeah, what exactly does that look like? Diving a little bit deeper into, because this also is going to be valuable for people listening too, to hear like how somebody builds a service like this. Like, what exactly does that look like?
Yeah. So in the simplest sense, the podcast host like yourself would just show up and record. And then when you hang up here and when we log off of Riverside and stop recording, my team goes to work. And so they create everything from the produced show and show notes, a blog post, an email newsletter, multiple pieces of short form content. And then they also produce content that's really good for you and really good for your guest, so that your guest is more likely to share content about them than about you. And so we want both people to be excited about the content that comes out of the show. And then we do all the publishing, all the post-production, and all the work so that all they have to do is work. And then for our top clients, we even handle the guest management. So we make sure they don't have to sit there trying to decide who they want, how to get them on, wasting time back and forth. So we just basically, you got to show up on the call and the team handles everything else.
That's awesome. That is great. Because I know, firsthand, a lot of that stuff, there's so much stuff, and sometimes you might need to have full team members. So if you could just have a company like yours come in and do that. And we're going to dive into a bunch of different things. I also want to talk about AI. I want to dive into some learning lessons you've gone through. That's something I like to ask people too. I know you also ask people that, which is amazing. And you're of course going to rate my podcast and some other things. So normally I wouldn't, drop this here a little earlier than normal, but because it's so relevant, where can people go if they want that help with their podcast, with launching that? Like what's kind of the way that they can learn more and dive into that?
Yeah. So go to burnmedia.co. And so it's BERN media.
Excellent. All right. Burnmedia.co. We'll put that down there in the show notes and in the description on YouTube. Now we've got more to go here, but I thought it was just a good time frame just with, you sharing a little bit more about exactly what you're doing and how you can support people. So let's shift gears a little bit. When it comes to AI, and this is one of the examples of things I love to ask everybody is how they're incorporating AI into what they're doing. I'm curious on the podcast side, but also in general, because you, of course, have all the, different brands that you have launched and work that you do. What are some of the ways that you're leveraging AI right now in your companies?
I've been a big believer and supporter and fan of automations in business from the early days, even things like shortcuts, right? And so having AI learning all of those shortcuts and then moving even faster has been really fun. And so agentic AI, where I've got AI voice answering company phone calls and handling things like that. We AI even in my email does an initial read of the email, does a first draft response based on all of my other emails and all of my other responses. I like to use AI just to save time. If I can buy back time, because it's so easy to just get massively overwhelmed in business and super busy. And you're often busy on the things that aren't the part of the business that fuels you, that makes you excited to do the job you decided to start. And so my first step in AI is just to save the tasks that I don't enjoy. Like get me back into tasks I do enjoy. And so we're doing it with a lot of those agentic style, and then obviously just building, GPTs for the team to use so we can move faster in our SOPs and in our processes and things like that. But for me, the biggest thing I love about AI is just the ability to automate and buy back time and mental resources so I can do things I enjoy.
I love it. I think that it's a great way of looking at it, right? Is that now it's okay, let's look at how you can use AI for that as well, but then also allowing you to focus on creativity, having it be a tool that can really amplify what you're doing. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And so that's a really good picture on, AI and how people can leverage that. I think shifting gears to another thing that I love to really get a sense of, and I know you kind of ask a similar question, is when it comes to lessons that you've learned along the way. And I love, and I can tell that you also, live by this too, like kind of like a win or learn entrepreneur's mindset. I actually had these put, I'll have to get you one of these next time we see each other, but I had these put on a coin. It's win on one side and learn on the other side.
Oh, that's
and
cool.
It also just says kind of entrepreneur's mindset is that learning is winning. And so I'm curious, what's an example of a time that you had a challenge or setback, but you realized that you actually learned, from that, and it helped, push you forward into what was next for you?
Yeah. And I've had way too many of those learning moments. And so I'll get into a specific, but I think the main takeaway that I've had over these last few years is that the idea of emotional currency and debt. And there is this idea that the moment you know that a decision is right is the easiest it will ever be to make that decision. And so we have to make a lot of hard decisions in business and entrepreneurship and just life in general, in our interpersonal relationships and everything else. And so many times we think we're going to put off a decision because it's either A, going to get easier, or B, we're just avoiding it because it's going to hurt someone's feelings. But the moment you knew that decision was right was the easiest it was ever going to be. And so what I've been really trying to work on is shortening the distance between knowing a decision is right and making the decision. And whether that's a hire or a fire, or whether it's an abandoning a project or whatever it may be, trying to shorten that learning curve. And so that's happened to me in the past where I've been involved in businesses that I loved and I was excited to be in them, but I knew that it was right for me to move on or out of the business. And there was an opportunity where, hey, I'm going to have a hard conversation and maybe we'll find a way to stay. But if not, I'm willing to leave. And sometimes that takes me a whole year to get emotionally to that place. Well, that year, you don't get it back and you're not doing your best work during that year. So it's not just hurting you, it's hurting the people that you're working with and the people around you. And I think the emotional currency and the emotional debt that happens when you avoid those hard conversations or those hard decisions, I think I'm at this point in my life finally realizing just how expensive those are. So my encouragement, if you're younger than me, is to learn from that mistake from me. And if you know a decision is the right one to make, don't hesitate.
And so as we kind of get towards the end here, we still have a final golden nugget and also critiquing my podcast here as well with all of your expertise. But in terms of people launching their own podcast, one question that I'm curious about, is there a framework that you found the most successful podcasts follow? And what would that framework be?
That's a good question, but I don't know if there's a framework that all of the most successful follow, except that I think it's similar to launching any other type of product or service. Does the market have a demand? Like, is there a demand? Right? I think if you're defining success by like the top downloads and those kind of things, then it comes into differentiation, right? So if you're saying, I want to be the top 10 in the business category, well, what are you going to do to knock out the people that are top 10? Because they have huge number of current subscribers. And so I think it just comes down to first defining success for that person. Is that the goal, or is it just having the right people following and or growing the business or whatever it might be? And so I think really the closest thing to a formula for a successful podcast would be just similar to, product market fit, right? Are you clear in who you're talking to? And, have you created something that you can be consistent with? And are you having fun doing it? Because I feel like that comes off in the episodes too. Everything else then turns into marketing. Are we promoting it? Are we making sure that people at least are experiencing it so they can choose to download and listen to it a second time? But yeah, I don't think there's like a secret sauce about how to just be number one tomorrow.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think exactly. That's the thing is like, that's the honest answer to it. And it's probably gonna be different for different people. But that leads me actually to a follow-up question though, when it comes to marketing. So of course, and this is actually perfect for Marketing Minds podcast, when it comes to actually marketing the podcast, there's a lot of methods that we've talked about, social media, ads on traditional platforms. What I'm curious about is, have you or do you recommend any of the podcast advertising platforms? So, or I am curious in general what you're finding works the best if people do go the advertising route. But I'm curious if you have any experience on any of the podcast advertising platforms, and if that's a part of it, or if it's more organic growth or other platforms.
Yeah.
What do you usually see?
Yeah, we focus more on just taking people from where they already are. So whether it's Facebook or Google or those kind of things, and getting them to see a piece of the content, and then with a call to action to subscribe. And so that's what we do, and it works pretty well. And you can, if you optimize that whole kind of process and flow, you can get subscribers at a decent rate and decent cost. And then it comes down to, is your show good enough for them to listen to a second, third, fourth time? And that's a little bit different, right? But we just kind of follow the traditional digital process of.
All right. So could you share that link again? We're going to put it all down in the show notes, but for people who might be listening, and then we're going to have you rate my critique the podcast here, give feedback, and then we'll have a final golden nugget. But yeah, where can people go again? Do you mind just resharing that link?
Yeah, if you're interested in launching your show and having all the work done for you, and you just have to show up, go to burnmedia.com.
Awesome. All right, perfect. We'll put that down below. And all right, the time has come. We're going to have a final golden nugget at the end. That's how we always love to end the show. But we got one more other thing that we have to do. This is your expertise. This is your domain. This is somewhere, I think, like probably in the late 20s of the episodes that are going to come out. But that being said, I am all about growing, and I'm open to feedback. So I'm curious, how was this podcast? What was your experience of this? And what are, things that you think I'm doing well, but what are things that maybe I'm not doing as well and I can improve on?
Awesome. Yeah, that's fun. So first of all, every time I've met you and chatted with you, your energy is great. And so that's really huge, because it's easier for your guests to be relaxed when you seem relaxed, and also have high energy when you have high energy. So that's awesome.
Thank you.
From a kind of a technical thing, you need a better microphone.
Really?
Your sound is not great. And that's okay. That's an easy fix. That's a fix on click Amazon and you're good tomorrow, right?
All right.
And then also a technical thing, I'm noticing like the camera bouncing a little bit. So it looks like you're either using a webcam or something that is affixed to your desk. And so I'd recommend having the camera up on a tripod or just behind you, right? So like mine sits directly above my screen, but on a tripod behind my desk, so that if I hit my desk, my monitors move, but my camera doesn't. But overall, man, your flow is good. Your questions are great. Your production, your booking, all of the technical sides of it were really solid, and you're a great interviewer.
Well, I really appreciate that. And I mean, it's music to my ears that it's like, all right, just maybe some of the setup here with the camera and the microphone. And actually, I'm curious, what microphone do you recommend? I think I did the camera side, but what microphone?
Yeah, there's three that are kind of in the good, better, best. This is the Audio-Technica ATR 2100. Very simple, high quality, low cost mic. So it's not expensive and it does a good job. But then there's the really common ones right now are by Shure, SCHUR, I think it is. And really any of their medium to high end podcast mics are solid. I'm actually going to be like upgrading to that here soon. Not that I actually think the sound will be any better. Honestly, just because I don't want the silver microphone anymore. That's it for me. But yeah, so I mean, really, it's hard to go wrong. There's a couple of other good ones as well, but you just want sound. You're a video creator, right? And sound matters, and just as much as the image. And so, especially on podcasts where many people aren't going to see you, they're just going to hear you.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. And that's the thing, is like when I come and shoot my YouTube content, we've got like the cameras and the boom mic, and we got, and also the lapel mic. Like we got two, actually the lapel I think is the main one that we use. Yeah. So we got all the different things, but I think for the podcast, we got to up the production quality. So
yeah, and you can go full high end production with like a pretty amazing setup for just a few $100. You can spend thousands if you want to. But you can have a really nice setup for just a couple $100.
Love it. All right. That's perfect. All right. Final golden nugget. Anything that you think is going to be really valuable for the audience, people watching or listening, to close out the episode?
Man, that's tough because it's such a general, broad question. I think my big takeaway, my big encouragement to people, if this is a podcast about marketing, this is a show about marketing, is simply move faster, test faster, do more. And I'm not saying do more like stay busy all the time, but you just got to test things and iterate and see what's working in your business. Test more hooks, test more things. And I love what you guys are doing, Aleric, with using AI to use more tests and have more, put more things out there. And I think that we are entering a stage in an era where vulnerability and lowering perfectionism is actually going to show who's human, right? Because AI is going to become more and more perfect. And so the thing that makes us human is our imperfections. And so I think realize that I'm not going to be perfect. I'm not going to, I'm going to say things. I'm going to and pause when I shouldn't. But that's what makes us human. And so in a time of AI, lean into the vulnerability, lean into the human, and just ship it. Just move faster.
I love it. All right. Very, very, very wise words. Definitely something to live by. And really appreciate having you on the podcast, Tyler. This has been fantastic.
My pleasure.
All right.